there I sat at my computer, right hand on the mouse, clicker on submit. I was staring at the Ironman registration page, about to sign up for the greatest endurance challenge on Earth. You start out in Ironman competition swimming 2.4 miles in the open water. Then you jump on your bike and you bike 112 miles. And then you finish the day off with a full marathon, 26.2 miles. And like I said, this happens all in one day. No breaks. Everything is timed. And if you cross the finish line in under 17 hours, you're an Ironman for life. So here I was sitting at my computer, looking at this registration page, trying to figure out if I was crazy. As I mentioned, I was going to be required to swim 2.4 miles in the open water. Think across a lake. At this point in time, I had never swam across a swimming pool. I didn't know how to swim. Next, 112 miles on a bike is roughly the distance from here to Richmond. I didn't own a bike. And even on a borrowed commuter bike, I had never really ridden more than, let's say, 10 miles, round trip, to and from school. Next, I want to mention that I was signing up for a full Ironman, which is one of the longest triathlons. Again, swim, bike, run. Anything that's swim, bike, run is a triathlon. And I could have chosen a, let's say, sprint triathlon. I could have started off with something much shorter than an Ironman. The swim for a sprint is only a half a mile. The bike is only 12 to 14, somewhere in there, miles for the bike. And then many of us have run a 5K, 3 miles, 3.1 miles. That ends a sprint. But I wasn't signing up for a sprint triathlon. I was signing up for a full Ironman. But there I sat at my computer, completely confident that I was going to be able to figure this out. Yes, the unknowns far outweighed the knowns. Yes, the hows were completely unanswerable at that point. But I had confidence that I would be able to figure it out. Why? Where did that confidence come from? So let's go 10 years back in time to basically say what he just said. Let's go 10 years back in time to a similar scene. It's me, again at my computer, right hand on the mouse, cursor on submit, only this time I'm not on the Ironman registration page. This time I'm on the Peace Corps page, Peace Corps homepage. I'm about to submit my application to serve for 2 years in a distant and developing country. And again, to make this story interesting, let's look at a couple of tidbits. I had never been to a developing country. I had never even left the United States. Didn't own a passport, didn't speak a foreign language, had never even met any Peace Corps volunteer. But I knew that this was the right decision. That decision to serve for 2 years, and what for me ended up being 3 years, 1 in Nepal and 2 in Ecuador, absolutely laid the groundwork for me to become an Ironman. Now, I would go on to finish that first Ironman that I was just talking about, the one that I needed to learn how to swim to do and buy a bike and run a marathon at the end of. Since then, I've completed 5 additional Ironman competitions. I will compete my 7th one in 3 weeks from now, Ironman Texas. And over the past 3 years, I have found that I have a knack for this sport. I've been 3 times named USA Triathlon All-American. I set the course record and was the first amateur at Ironman New York. I've qualified for World Championships a number of times. And 2 years ago, the one where this picture was taken on the right, I finished top 10 in my age group at Ironman World Championship in Kona, Hawaii. So that's fantastic. And what I'm here to talk to you about is how the lessons I learned in the Peace Corps have prepared me to become the Ironman competitor that I am. So let's kick it off with facing fears. As I mentioned, I couldn't swim. So that was the biggest fear that I had to face. So in my first triathlon, I was entering the water. It was very cold. I had my wetsuit on. I'm working my way in. I'm very scared. My heart is racing. Butterflies are battling in my stomach. And I'm looking out across the lake at this lake I was going to have to swim across, and I'm looking out at this buoy, incredulously looking out at this buoy. How am I going to make it to that buoy and back? And I thought to myself, God, the last time I was this scared, I was standing outside of my first classroom in Nepal, overhearing the kids yelling at each other in a language I couldn't make out, words I couldn't understand. From that moment in Nepal, over the next 9 months that I would end up serving in Nepal, those kids on the other side of that door taught me over and over again that life's greatest experiences lie just beyond that barrier of fear. And so what did I do in the lake? I thought of those kids, and I put my face in the water, and I started swimming, just as I had pushed through that door and met my students in Nepal. The next thing, rolling with the punches. So you can imagine in a competition that for some people lasts up to 17 hours, a lot can and indeed does go wrong. My first Ironman, I had 2 flats in the first 10 miles of 112 miles, and I only had 1 spare tube. In my next Ironman, 40-mile-per-hour winds kicked up waves so big I couldn't even see the next buoy. You have to be able to see to a buoy to swim to it and swim around and come back. So I just sort of floated on, as I had to do many times in the Peace Corps. In the middle of last season, I was diagnosed with a stress fracture in my foot, which, of course, sidelined me for the rest of the season. But I used that time to learn how to swim better. So that worked out well. So I'm just basically telling you that countless times in races and training, dehydration, heat, wind, cold, have forced me to recalculate my goal pace over and over and over again. But that's something that I had been preparing to do ever since I was in the Peace Corps, or the whole time I was in the Peace Corps. Every time a bus failed to show up, every time the Jeep broke down, every time the rain washed out the road and made it impassable, and every time in Nepal during the monsoon rain season when I had just hand-dried or hand-washed my kurta sarwal and hung it outside, and it was almost dry, and the rain came back and absolutely soaked it. All those experiences were really just preparing me to roll with the punches of Ironman competition. Okay, finding opportunity in defeat. So you might have noticed on an earlier slide that I only served in Nepal for, well, less than a year. My father started his battle with multiple myeloma, which is a rare and incurable blood cancer, just as I was beginning my service in Nepal. Eventually, it became too much for me to handle emotionally, to be that far away from my family and especially my father. And I made the very difficult decision to end my service early and go back to California, where my parents were. Over the course of the next year or so, his condition stabilized, and I reapplied to go to the Peace Corps. And I ended up being able to serve for the full 27 months in Ecuador. When I returned home from Nepal, I felt absolutely defeated. Though it was for a good reason, I felt that I had failed. I felt that I had failed my village. I felt that I had failed my dreams. I felt that I really had failed myself. But I found the opportunity in that defeat. Every Peace Corps volunteer has this opportunity, is lucky to have this opportunity to have a window into a culture like no other experience can provide. But because I experienced defeat, let's call it, in my first Peace Corps service, I was lucky enough to have a window into 2 cultures. And that's something that's actually been, I will say, my life's greatest gift. My father was even healthy enough to come visit me in Ecuador during that second service. Finding opportunity in defeat helped me to prepare for many Ironman competitions. I'll talk to you about the second one. I had hoped to win the second Ironman that I had signed up for. But as I mentioned before, these 40-mile-per-hour winds kicked up, and they had another plan for my day. And so by the time I crossed the finish line, I was about 2.5 hours after where I wanted to be. I ended up in the med tent with IVs with severe dehydration, and I absolutely was defeated. I felt that I had failed. But I used that feeling of failure, or that defeat, to fuel the next several months of training. And then in my third Ironman, I won, I set the course record, and I qualified for world championships, and qualified to compete as a professional triathlete. Self-reliance. Long hours you spend in the Peace Corps alone. Long hours. Nightfall signaled the retreat of my family into their respective bedrooms. And I, being a respectable woman and not wishing to challenge the cultural taboo of being out after dark, I too retreated into my bedroom, into my thoughts, into my loneliness, and into my homesickness. And I fought through that homesickness to realize that I was strongest in those moments alone. And in Ironman, I spend a lot of time alone. When you're swimming, you can't really chat with people next to you. Ironman rules actually prevent you from drafting, so you can't really bike next to anyone. By the time you're on the run, you are so tired you don't want to talk. So even though you're with 2,500 other participants, you're alone. Peace Corps prepared me to be strongest in my moments alone. Self-accountability. My Peace Corps staff was very far. In Quito, Kathmandu, very far from my village. I was accountable mainly to myself. Showed up to work on time, even when my counterparts did not. I went beyond my given assignment of health educator in Ecuador and teacher trainer in Nepal to lead domestic violence awareness campaigns, to lead income generation projects, and to even coach a youth track team. Likewise, as an Ironman, I'm accountable mainly to myself. No one's there to push me out of bed at 5 a.m. when the alarm goes off and I gotta go swim. No one pushes me out the front door when it's raining or too hot to go for a run. And when I get out of the pool, I'm the only one who knows if I've swam 1,000 yards or 5,000 yards. And when I cross the finish line, I'm the only one who knows if I could have pushed harder. Using my talents to serve. Raise your hand if you're interested in the Peace Corps because of that attraction to adventure. That's why I joined the Peace Corps. I was attracted to adventure. But once I got to Nepal and later in Ecuador, I realized that I had a gift for breaking down complex problems into digestible parts for my learners. And I used that gift for 3 years, Nepal and Ecuador, and using those talents to serve others really was the most beautiful part of my Peace Corps service. I found out that I have a gift in triathlon. I have found a way to use triathlon, to use my media exposure in triathlon, like this article in Triathlete magazine, to share with the world a cause that's very near and dear to my heart. You can see in this podium jacket I have, Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation is across the top. So I use triathlon as a platform to tell the world what multiple myeloma is, a rare and incurable blood cancer that my dad's fighting, but also to give back to this organization that has developed the treatments that have kept my father alive for the past 11 years. So that when I cross the finish line, I'm not just doing it for myself, but I'm using my talents to serve others, just as I learned how to do in the Peace Corps. 2 years ago, I crossed the most revered finish line in Ironman competition, that of the Kona World Ironman Championships finish line. And you can see in this picture, I have in one hand the American flag, my country, and in the other hand, I paid tribute to the countries, the cultures, the people, the men, the women, the children, even the goats that prepared me to be an Ironman. Thank you.